So, without further ado, we have to invite, one of our best speakers, one of the most eloquent people you've ever met, one of our own that whenever he speaks, you listen and you don't even want to end because all he spewed is wisdom. We have other than, our own Pastor Chemagar. Karibu.
Kongoi konyo. Engje jak chemengejin poryen nepokolenjin Gotabgaa ojamwa katak tukul ngai netap cheiso le jamgei. Jamgei konyo. Jamgei tuk. Jamgei giyen. Jamgei mojogron. Jamgei gitarut. Jamgei garik. Kojama guys. Kongoi ngokwek tukul jiko itu. Amaja ngalale git nako gimwawech. We are talking about family dynamics during cultural transition. So, because of time, I want to be able to start this right away so that we can have time for questions. Ngokateke bikyo guya kagigatke. Kokoteke amu majokonai chametabke nebo bororiet komugul. Majokotaune ole uemet. Natamne kingeba besiobor. Kokikikoteke biik. Kingetuiyo kikoteke komie ketaune bororiet komugul kineu. Kebwa olimbo kiyenyi. Kebwa kot keit kaa. Ipkeba kitarut. Tatya kemwa karik. Majokonai kole tos chomege kot kochomege kaa. Ako chomege kot kochomege ko. Ako chomege kot kochomege yotet. Melen kimache kenai kityo olin ak tuguk ak rurotet ak kit age tugul kimache kenai kot kele tos tugul ole makai. Ko amache keketu kot keitu yutok. Sikobit angalale ngolyondoni konyo ko kamache kenai ak ketebege kele mite tetutik somok che amache angalale kurgotik somok eng nwokindo. Kurge netai amache asoman kitabutab Laitorinik nebo oeng kurge 17 ataune koitetab 24. Kikebwa ko kitoek ako kibunotik eng emoni. Ako kait betusiek chekin koit ibindab kaplelach komanda biik. Ako ngomakirib kom betusiek kora chebo kipnyigei. Kokiba kot kowek biik chekiwek sotonik eng Tanganyika, eng Uganda, eng Kapkejiri, akoi Masai. Komache ketebe keutas kenai kele kimyono eng kakwatisiek somok chemache angalale Laitorinik nebo oeng. I want you to read in 2 Kings chapter 17, and I will speak especially in Kalenjin because my slides are in English, so you can follow that. So for expounding, I'll be able to mix it up because of many people that are listening here and back home. Kalau Laitorinik na boyeng, kurgeta manak tasap kota dip temangwan ni. Ako amat Laitoria taba Surya big kubungune Babylon, Akuta, Akaba, Amat, Aksabaraim. Ako anday jeng kana so kap Samaria wek lago kap Israel, koger lago kap Israel. Ako bunji jeng Samaria, ako menying kana so kiek. Ako kay maiwa Jehovah. Eng taune tameng atenwa ne ba olotok. Koya kanyon kamuktan det Jehovah ngatunyik ako barejek. Nameng alyanda nataya. Dasi jet mornet. Cetay ba kwatit akwe ne babik cegiba. Koginyo Laitoria tab Surya ako mutpik ceba emeta Babylon. Tatya ko nampi ka Israel ako mut kolul. Tatya ko kere biik che kakibunon okwek emet age chebunu kejun. Kinyait emoni komakonai bitonwekab emoni. They did not know the culture, the rituals of the God of the land. But what happened instead? The Bible says God sent lions to destroy them. That is the first group. The next group is in the book of Ruth, Elimelech's family. In the time of the judges, O lagi wajita nagibuno Bethlehem, Judah, asakabit koruto engemeta Moab. They meant to be there for only a few days, but the Bible says, and as soon as they reach there, a moment shortly after that, Elimelech dies. Kung ang niya ako mabayo, Elimelech, kung nagkabyo sa ni Naomi, kung ako kayong masok. Then, after 10 years, the two boys, Mahlon and Chilion, married Moabite women. But unfortunately, they also died. 3 men dead, leaving 3 widows. But when Naomi heard that God had remembered Israel in Bethlehem, Judah, she journeyed back to her land of promise. Genesis chapter 46 is another verse I want us to read, and then we will discuss all these 3 verses together. Awan ang banda nyo in Israel, kung batatukol jagitin niya kong ete Beersheba, kodojin and the tuyetap kamukta indet. Aw ngalal jika mukta indet tinendet. Enga ngutiyetap kemba kwen kole jagobo. Kole jaga mukta indet tap pandangung may way jor tege agoy may tamisri. Arta magtasap ko tetagenge. Akwanyun jagobo Joseph komwa jibara o lenji agoy paba. Akwe rik chigitupche. Agay jirek kwak aktu kwak tol jigitinyay kubunwe metap kanan. So here we see another 3rd company, the family of Jacob. So what is interesting is when you look at the first group of Assyrian settlers, the Bible says when they settled in the land, they did not know the God and the rituals of the God of the land. And as a result, lions were sent to destroy some of them. Number 2 is the family of Elimelech. Number 3 is the family of Jacob. Joseph not only goes as the prime minister of the land to file the papers for his father and mother and his brothers. So the process of the green card in the 3rd one went through. And the Bible tells me they were promoted and given jobs as the elite of the country. So I'm talking about 3. Number 1 is when we arrive in this country, there are 3 groups. Those who struggle as a result of the changes and the acculturational stress. And unfortunately, some of us have ended up in very tragic situations. I've been part of many of us who have finally been forced to transport back some of the remains of our people who have died in this country through very tragic deaths. I've been involved in courts dealing with issues of homicide. I've spoken oftentimes as the friend of the court dealing with issues of suicide and homicide. I've dealt with many that have been serving time in jail, and some of them are out, and some of them are still in. I wonder whether that group that represents the first group, who end up in mental hospitals, who end up in prisons and jails, who end up sometimes dead, how do we help reduce that number? Then we have the second group of those who are surviving somehow because the other ones have died, but they try to struggle to be able to make ends meet. And then we have another group of those who have been able to succeed. Ngogi ka bwa mongara, ngogi ka bwa ba isyo ni kapso manet, ngogi ka bwa ne ko solda ko kumnyei. Ang kap ko nyigisit ko kin, among kap ko kromite money, amugalo tunet. Dealing with racism and prejudice until this country becomes so difficult because sometimes you're accused of something you did not do. Especially when it is an argument between what you said and what she said. And we find ourselves serving time for something you did not do, particularly a black boy and a black man. When we are dealing especially with issues of sexual abuse or harassment, we have people right now serving time for that. And sometimes it's because they did not have a competent attorney to represent them. But so my question is, I began to embark on a research. What happens when a people develops in one culture, masters that culture, and the logistics of surviving life in that culture, then transfers to a new culture? And Dr. Boris spoke about that yesterday. What happens when we transition and there is change at the crossroads? That is why we're talking about that. So I embarked on a research for my dissertation, and the question is, how do married people that are married in Kenya, stayed in Kenya, then transfer to this country? Angotiba kap kogos. Aginyo poryan ko mikol ko iba kalenjin ananiba tugen ananiba kapseges ananiba sabhe. Akong yo yor tiga kering kano ko kagemwa kele tuguk kyok se imiundok ko kainet kay naile. This village, life in the village, was nestled between those. But it also gave you this meaning, the purpose and meaning of life, because it came from this belongingness, because you feel that I am part of something larger than I. Number two, this communal society, because of this notion of I am because we are, and we are therefore I am, also helped you to be able to understand the purpose of your life. Number three, it provided transcendence, because you felt like when you look at life, you're not only at the intersection of the past, the present, and future, but you are also the connection between the inanimate and the animate. So, ingi tononing nyo tagi igen tulwe na kejam ke bendip ke tiani agi tiani len tindret ya bosia nanggoliel ke kol bai tindret nanggoliel ke bangani ya berangka. So you knew standing up here that I not only represent the continuity of life from the living to the non-living, from the animate to the inanimate, but also between the living and the dead. For our people traditionally believed that I was, I am, and I will be. Now, as a result of that, it gave you this level of transcendence. Amugin ge mengishi yak bikyog agin gengele agon ge wal jinge to ga mi betu ne bat to ga jebe matau negi kiyog ko na teta ko ya ge no wik betu nin ko ya ga nin betu ta ga ko ya ga nin betu ta ga ogi mi betu negi ba jebe matau negi mo tore ti ji ko ya to ga ako ya to tyong ko ano puri ko mare risa moe ko kurut ko iskaling, because he was part of the culture. And so, not only did we get transcendence, but also stories to live by. Many times we struggle with self-esteem and the meaning of life and the purpose of life. Lakini, in case si ko ngete ko meaning, ko tula kwani ko ngengole aga metap kai amugi gugurgogo. Ko matingilal boyot ko pol linggoy na pagpangut. Kung ko tonon lakwen na tagitigin na bagay nisyo kayo nga ogere kwanda lapte tap konda ogere kwanda wala mutyo karge tubong nya kasis alia ako tonon damit mating kumini stories that we live by. Now what happens therefore when we leave Jamhuri agay tuguron kung nyaga la ndege we are transitioning from the village, from being a village to a tribe of how many? 2. Nyo gerge ko betu nile kiat kinya engolimbaga when you had a relationship. When you are married into a family, you don't marry that entire person, you marry the whole entire tribe. So intimacy to us was what you do with other people. Kung mutage gujiyo mushini karog in mustai garon ibi uni out engkau ino. Agai tangkas yat ebi sita koi sa tagengke. Tatinyo itigran uga koi ka sinyi tabianyon. Agai koi poyot sekapit kityagun eunekin ko koi men kerate kerating kemonjo koi manungut yosi ko jamitu si ko jekin helakwet. But the question was, during the whole day, omiak kebioso galagi, omiak sangke, omiak mama, omiak ngo, omiak piktukul. Ko weri naginya ko kewak po isya kimigo. Ngoy ngete na mening ko kewende ko. Aginetin kya kwirta mo kapkaben ke liajin tukul jagi kya komi jaga ka pom sagamege. Mi jaga ay tukul intimacy with what you do with other people. And so mental health was not the biggest issue because you had the whole entire community. Akong kot kabit na ko kyol wagin ke muay toy. Akong kot ko gimi murinik yang apko ko nyalil mon osotik kwa. Ko muay to ko ketep sela kwa ni gel kalya. Ko muay atin don ni ki kele nga ko jol wagin weri. Ki akta bo ke muay bo ishe ko ngetya bo ishe ko akta pikapin danyi. Nya ke ngalal jiwerin gele kalya o kai murin git yong kon. Liasi berjabiasan ko macam kaya berkang dia. Kemasap kolelit. Kongkot katanggoy. Ako nam ko atiek. Ko nam jipi ka pinda ko atiek. Kole jipi ka pinda ka ko temenet mo gimuji kiwe kiboishe. Amu ka ko temene pi ka pinda ni. Ako ko ngolol jipi pinda ko yesyo. Kung nyogi ko jiparishe ko ndakot. Ako turmus. Within 1 week he's dead and gone. That took care of it. To you. Now it becomes a problem. We don't have the village anymore. Intimacy is no longer what you do with other people and all these other issues. Intimacy is into me, see. Okay, he's supposed to be the only other friend you have. He's a professional, he's a mother, he's a homemaker, he's everything else, and you're supposed to be also the co-gossiper. Mami's chitaga rin liyo Among komong ngalal tu ay po kasi chabaga. So, igere bilagay kang kuro. Oh, good. The problem is, kangay to you kuro. Then we have this issue of adjustment. You are dealing with now opportunity stresses. You are dealing with demand stresses. I don't understand. What did you say? You are dealing with constraint stresses. And now, you even begin to wonder about your own cognitive appraisal. Because it's like, wait a minute. Because our British system is superior, but the way they do things here is different. Not because it's better, but then you begin to doubt yourself. And you reach a point where you begin to wonder, what about if I don't have the social support that I usually had? This is now where we are dealing with this acculturation stress. 2, we have now intergenerational communication problems. Because you are actually talking from 2 different cultures. Kanya sinyate tanong ko jiptang nyo. Kung ilen kasi nandi ni matinggi na nandi. Kung kasi, because you're actually living in 2 different galaxies. Nga naman Iwan di Walmart bibu. Then okay, may mbiyat. Kung gitip tiyangon nyo, ang mesa ang tayo, may mbiyat. Ibuati niya may mbiyat, nagimikor ka tuling mo nga. Wajam ko tebe, kuya, ta ko misese na korungon nyo. Ako miyore na korektar, kway na yun, di kare jeb. Chemendel ko wekse, ibubeging metit. Wag etos to ka ko mitual yating yan, kasi. At yan yung sirta tarityat ko lang, wow! So we just hear it. Ko where in ang pamem maem biyanda ni ko buati aisle number 3 na ba Walmart. Same mango, 2 different galaxies. You mean it is happy? Come in Walmart. Understand anything like him? No. Then you begin to wonder why they don't understand what you're talking about. I want to get it, but they're in a different place. Amuto mokwaga. Mengan dukya dai ngalale, amengan oren nagabudu ja mendelai no. Mengan dukya. Ki tiame manigil gel kini. Ko miritas mami lugai ko tabo kapsa notas. So when they leave that door, they don't go to school. They go to another galaxy. Kung kumangune organa ko nyoko yuko kanya uli. Ko lingua another planet. Now, do you understand why there is a problem? Amu tuku, you're worried about the learning. Panek winning is yat you mara bore jumi ko you. Galajik ko yan and you name from 1. What was the problem? Because they cannot imagine ni samus ko ngete ko kisik tagisik ko ya. So ko te bes ko la ko gigalya. Kabu de gel da wendi ko len gimo mi basete. Mo nge baba nang karit. The other problem is that the foundation of marriage was very different. Amu genge miga ko gigle jin jepta bore tagana dunya na kwe. And marriage was a social contract. That as you lived, all children belonged to the clan. So, but they subcontracted the work of giving birth to you as a family. Lagi di bangalago, paurani. Kung nyaga itu, kawalak emoni amuga, kawalak ko tingkanya. Now, the foundation of marriage is no longer the social contract. Now there was this issue of romance added to the marriage. And so, Magelen, King Norana, among Gebendiga Tagele, those are things were but here, and Guy, Kigo Tuniji, Kubunorana, Gonyogoi, Otinya were but here, Kagawagolin generations back, and I gele, Pijubatungo, Kokukona, Gaga, Yon, Moy Gogos. Keger YouTube chelen gu manam ke. Amu keger ingeni sengisya tingolin the genetic pool keger kele there is a problem kele ngo manam ke tioni agaje. Kele otor korose ngobwa ko ta ke bwa ko ita mu gi musu ko ita sa ita managenge. Nyago ba ng noblo. Sa anek tokol ko tori korose kele jago ya kamatay ke buju korose galak chele lak. Nyaga ba ko ke ngolol jin kele. Go maya tionda kai go in go no tionda ningiro kele wen somok kapwa jun to nyo go bendi kele ji juna wek to rose ko ngigero go manga mai to go rose kele nganya go batapat yun nya go baju nas kele ayya go no go chi motiet as ko no bal somok ke gas nya gi go ji ko ne bo lagi ning nyu go go ek ne mage gi oret mage gi tionda gigere ne love romance. Now, in addition to that, another thing was added. Sexuality was added to romance. And every time a new thing is added, this now becomes the most important. I need to know. Road testing. Sexuality now determines the romance. And the romance is supposed to determine what? The marriage. So now, road testing began here. Sexual experimentation before marriage, and then this one was added. So this determines whether I love you. So I have to start with that in order to come here, and then in order to come to that. And then we added another one, which is now identity added to sexuality. So this time, no, my identity is no longer pinned to my biology. Yeah, I can decide that today I have this kind of a biology, but I can decide tomorrow I want to be something else. So ngela kwet college in baba. Ako alam ma kwa jep tarani kung ngete mo tay, ko ngete. you open your eyes. No, it has nothing to do with that. So now, it's no longer now, identity is not tied to your geography and geography and also biology. So the identity here is no longer pinned to your biology, but to your orientation. And this determines your sexuality, and this determines your romance, and the romance determines the foundation for marriage. So here is where the problem is. Because now, this has completely changed. And not only are we dealing with this, but now we are dealing with, what if I am married and I am happy? But what if I can be happier? So it doesn't matter how happy I am, but I can be happier. So now there is another problem, because now you are moving from this village to a tribe of two. And when you deal with this foundation, you begin to realize now that there is a problem within the house. Now, when you look at how all this is now affecting our health, then you can realize these factors that are influencing the health of an immigrant. We reach a point where we talk about immigrant paradox, where we come from home expecting that this is a better land. And so when you look at the health of the immigrant arriving from Kenya, the expectation is that they will do much better now, but sometimes it is the opposite. Either we are beginning to be obese, either we are beginning to have mental issues, and what was thought to be like the opportunity to climb up, it's beginning to go down. And that is partly because of the pre-migration issues, like trauma, torture, and climate, to especially things that have to do with economic disparities, epidemiological profiles, linguistic, and what we call social distance, because the difference between the two cultures. Now you add to that what was happening during the migration, how we arrived here. Okay, to you, everything will be over. No, it's not easy as that. So, language difficulties, separation from family, this authorization, and social exclusion and discrimination. After you landed is when you realize, oh my goodness, I'm black. I didn't know that. What happened? Because it was not an issue, but now it's become an issue here. How do you deal with it? And then most of the time we've stayed here, and it reaches a point where you get so fed up and you decide, I'm doing what? I'm going back home. Then you realize, the country you also left is different. You're no longer a Kenyan anymore after you've been here. Ang inya ilen kawen diga. Telen na iti tegi kawala golit. Iga pa eme. Ngabi len inga ti len kawaka kapisa ki ko stress emon. Mo jawo kapisa agba mo ibeni agba wasibek. Koi ta ko lo ka unke kapisa. Kela ji me ko ne jai but bana ma ko di jai na suguisi. O ga mo nari bahuni guys. Isi le ke paran korita de koendi. Ileni ti tenyor wikyo kami nasare tol kiko pa chogen mi jun Nairobi ko kiko pa jun ko landa ko mastage kwa ko kia bar mayang ko gerin ko moy ko jutimda ko ne ko nget ko ne ko wir chip ko et ko le ja ko na ja jo bwana sasa ile ko nyon ne ko rodis mata mai ben ba ungei mata nyor ji ne ngalol si tuai ako ila nyinde ke tiwege lagi nim nyona no bor top manyor gi no jenge e utany ne nangile ni le go gi ngele ko ima ngolem ko le ko meta ko ma me ani sigisiet ko lo ye tele ko mel ko pele bi isi sa se bi le so what do I do I wege ne im nyona nu amu manyor gi no isore Because the culture completely changed. You can't get what you wanted. So you try to go back, it becomes a problem. So how do we prepare to go back? And how do we prepare to be in this country? Because you cannot completely change overnight. Then there is role confusion. Then you wonder whose lifestyle now will be compromised and whose will be discarded. In Gaolini, you knew who woke up to feed the baby. You knew who went out to kill the the beast and bring it home. In Nyagitugorani, it is different. Your wife will be the first one to get a job, and you are the last one to get a job. Kung Gabriel si met Kemboy, kaya lagawan ba mruil, kaya jom daw gidogo, amoy si. Kawangasi, yabi aset kurwe, wala pa manong odi ateng kode. What kind of a man are you? Gabriel lagi lagakawa uga. What am I doing in this house? So the question is now reevaluating the views and the beliefs about ourselves. So you reach a point where you begin to wonder, what is the basis of being a male and a female anymore, because your identity has been challenged. Now, all these are happening, but add to it now the danger of trauma, if there is trauma going on. I'm using this in courtesy of Dr. Angie Minor. So here we are dealing with issues of trauma. This is trauma within the family. We may have come from a place where, unfortunately, there was emotional abuse and sexual abuse. There was an absenteeism of a parent, maybe because of drugs and whatever. What about if a family member has been incarcerated? What about chronic illnesses in the families? What about issues of displacement and death of a family member? And you're dealing with all those issues. But even beyond this, you're dealing with all this community trauma. Poor housing, historical and collective trauma, poverty, food scarcity, rural-urban migration, extrajudicial killing, all these things, the impact of colonialism and historical trauma. Structural racism, particularly even due to colonialism. And then when you arrive here, you're still dealing with that as well. Violence, crime. Then now the environment, you're dealing with that as well, back home and even here. Vector-borne diseases, limited drinking water, droughts, deforestation, heat waves, all this. But at the same time, we also have these issues of cultural trauma in the subconscious level. Issues of historical genocide, historical grievances and slavery, toxic masculinity, intergenerational trauma, all this coloniality. These are issues that we are now adding. Most of these are at the subconscious level. What do you do as a man when you finally arrive here and for the first time you realized that your wife was a victim of sexual abuse? That maybe it was common in the village and everybody said, you know what, that's what happens. But she arrives here and now begins to learn about that it was supposed to have been dealt with, that somebody must have suffered for that something happened even within the family, and for the first time, it hits. Because she was in survival mode, but now you're in a place where she's no longer in that survival mode. Now the reality has dawned, everything is up, and that trauma begins to ooze out. And all of a sudden, your relationship begins to change. What do you do? When now she has the language that she did not have. What she thought was normal in some situations, but now realizes, no, it was not. Let me try again. happens is historical trauma and generational embodiment of traumatic experiences, what we call adverse childhood experiences, will always change because of the social conditions of where you grew up and the local context. It will result in adverse childhood experiences that begins to change the neurodevelopment of the brains, particularly if this happened earlier in their growth, where the neurons were developing. So the neurotransmitters and the neural development is altered. As a result of that, we see social and emotional and cognitive impairment that continues, even though we are doing well academically. But we begin to realize that there are some things that are happening, and there is adoption of health behaviors. See, this ACEs study was discovered because Dr. Felitti was doing a research with one of the CDC doctors, working with Kaiser Permanente. There was a lady that was scheduled for a major surgery. She decided that she is going to eat and gain weight. Hopefully, nobody will rape her again when she is obese and overweight. That she will be ugly enough to avoid that trauma. She was doing it as a coping mechanism. And then he began to do the same research, and over discovered that a lot of early childhood experiences are now reflected 50 years later, 40 years later, through high blood pressure, through cardiovascular issues, through things like diabetes, through all these kinds of things. And I don't have time to show the statistics and the correlation between the ACEs and all complications of every kind of disease. Not just lifestyle diseases, but all kinds of diseases, and the correlation that comes as a result of that. Because of changes that occur at the disruptions of the neuropsychological development and the wiring of the brain, not only the wiring of the brain, but also the interpretations of the epigenes, the epigenetic reactions, and the reading of all the chemical processes that are supposed to go on. So that's why also there is an adoption of health risk behaviors that result in disease and disability and social problems leading to early death. So as a result of this, as immigrants, we begin to struggle to look for happiness. Not meaning, not purpose on life, but happiness. And the moment we go for pleasure and happiness, we get into an issue because there is a paradox that the more you run searching for happiness, the less you're able to get it. You become more anxious, more depressed, looking for this happiness. Because happiness is defined as a state of comfort and ease, a feeling good at the moment. But the moment you're looking for that, you begin to realize that the longer you chase for it, the more unhappy you become. So how do we deal with this? Because we're talking about family support. Number one is when you realize where we've come from as a society and realize that the society of settlement here. So what is happening is understanding the sociological background, the differences between the culture we've come from and the culture that we're settling in, and the dynamics that are generated because of this cultural contact. Then what happens sometimes is when we arrive here, there is a, right here in the middle is a precipitating event. Tai wendi ngay labati, tele ni gar Christmas ala bale tula. Kung nyele ni kuskongo kakoit kita. Agele jin konulution. But before that, ko kage gergele ngoi tering ngoi toy. Ko kaga walang ngalega ak tebutik jigitebenet. So the question is, there is a precipitating event that occurs here, which begins to be a stressor in your life. How you deal with that will determine whether it is going to be a growth for you or a stress response. And the strategy you use will ultimately result in this outcome of how do you deal with that. And most of the time, it depends on what we call moderating factors before migration and moderating factors during and after migration. What is your personality? What is your language level? The accent involved, the acculturation strategies, and the training experiences that you bring. Again, the amount of contact that you have had, the length of this contact, the cultural distance, and the amount of life changes you have gone through. Because you are bringing everything to the table when you are dealing with all these issues. Among yeleni batile, kiagle jo tait pitanine, upke tepenen. Kung gileni batinge te korona takatukoy botile menyeng kolimbak ega anang ko bagole. Lene nye koro, gebrisi met kila kwanete no name. Taglen getep kelim nyo bamru, isi sibile kan nye ko tap kolen ko it ko ka ke jubingolin. Amu ka wang nye tolinda ke. Ip kolen ko gurlistit, ko itu sinye. Iko ito reject coba Mr. More, kili More, oye yang More nyon. Ingolato kol taglen kili no mamiane budin ke gure More. Oh, Mr. Mo, you mean Mr. Mo? Okay. You feel like an idiot. Inyo ka, kindare kapisa. Mu ko toy mege ni tele ni tegole jo agak nyo I don't want any black thing touching me. Aw esok pam kerije si jibi jenga tanyo na nas nyo ko jinge nyo pam kerije jo to ili kaneni. Ile ni to ka ke wira ka binre. Koit po yot nyeleng ko tueguni. Ko ya mesi nyenye ka ba uli. Ko gwa jweri ko laki lep ke ba ubi jingu be to ni na nyon. Ka ko itas. Le na le men ngoli na ba ko le. Ako kay men lagat ko gibrisi mo siya lagat tibat ki karit ko imenit. Ko ngep ka kay polisi lebas. Nebasomok na barane. Kumabuat ti alang tu ila tarjini ang na ya biasa ada si tao ya he. Lagi ko jagay. There are so many things going on. Ko tell limbore so having you what is happening at the cultural level, at the societal level. What is happening to us when you add issues like the Black Lives Matter and all the things that happened. Every time this is happening. You know, what is amazing is research has shown something very interesting. That when women delay giving birth to their first child, the longer a woman delays giving birth, the better the chances for the mother and the child. The longer they wait to give birth, the better the chances for all women except black women. And so why except black women? Because the longer they wait, all women have better chances for their own health and the child's health. But the longer black women postpone their marriage, postpone their childbirth, the worse the outcomes. Why? Because the longer they deal with all the racism, the longer they deal with all the trauma, the longer they deal with all these things, the worse the chances. Are we together? So while we are dealing with all this, what is going on here? So suppose we go back and instead we begin to change these issues and look for support systems that can be able to help us. So that instead of understanding the strength of what we call PACEs, PACEs is almost the opposite or the antidote against ACEs, advanced childhood experiences. But we are now talking about protective and complementary experiences. So protective and complementary community experiences. So what you're doing is, instead of bringing the ACEs, what we are doing now is that we are actually allowing what we call the community cultural wealth. So instead of allowing the ACEs, the advanced childhood experiences that we have gone through, the community, you remember I said the community gave you what? Belongingness, it gave you purpose, it gave you transcendence, and stories to live by. So, but by coming together as a tribe, as a people, it does help us to instead get that protective and compensatory community experiences. So as we build a community here, what it does then is it helps us know that we are coming from a position of strength and also forming a tribe and a culture and a community that can be able to support each other to complement whatever differences we have. And as a result, when we begin to go through this, we have actually not deficits in skills, but strengths. And therefore, we begin to have responses that are not only effective, cognitive and behavioral, but they are positive instead of negative. And therefore, it will result in both positive, sociocultural, and psychological outcomes. I want to close with this verse. You know, when I read the first group, remember, let me go back. In Laitorin ng Naboeng, 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 24. Kokole, Kimut Laitoria, the king brought Assyrians and resettled them to replace the place where the Hebrews, the Israelites, had been taken away. And what he was very strategic about is between Galilee and Judea, he placed them right in between them to make sure that both of the two houses, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, he resettled them in Samaria to cause a buffer zone so that they don't come together, to separate the two tribes. But the Bible says a very interesting thing. Amugi magonggen piton wegap aksautik ang magutik akaruray wegap cheptalelita be mo no togi. What happened? Ogyam ngatunyik. What did they do instead? Verse 28. Mataw na tipte magtasap. Ako ngatan yung Laitoria taba Surya ole. O mutu agenge engtisik. Yagi mut ke lul ko lulanik. Asa kapit komenyo lotok ako neti jega ko bogit no kamukto inde tabe mo notok. Konya anyo nagenge engtisik yagi mut. Ko ba olimba Samaria so kapit komen Bethel ako neti jegi ulaga nyol gi gwaita kamukto inde. Imugak sege buang yagi tu emoni ko emetap tondan. Emetap kejun emetap igalak. What they did is, in order to stop them from dying, they returned one of the priests that had been taken to captivity. Asagabit nyogotebe kwenunwa agonet magutig apkiptayat ab Israel. Natamone koyok Jehovah tisik kotebe kwenutap tuyoni. Asagabit ko barwech magetap Jehovah na migibsangwit. Semangate kesui amugi mia mambaji age metap tondan. Me tu agi muat tenenge moni amai nai ulagi bunai. Amumi ngatunyik jagi ko tarbikyo. No tamune migbai tinik kwenunyo jagi yok Jehovah asukabit konet mengote tabiyatenyo. Sukabit ko sapjabikyo kagait proindo. No ko tinggolimbaga. Kung ako sa engkesasis, ako it proinda, nagaitip ko birenik ko akya. Kung gut ko matonon sa bigap Jehovah, kung do jiburyet, nabakotap Jehovah. Kung ito ikasuy. Kero, that is the first thing we need to do in rebuilding the foundation. Number two, we need to rebuild the village in this great metropolis and get support systems within God's people. Majo kapit support system ne baboy siyak kengalal jin manungotay ako bit kasimenik kay mujugoti kwanyik kemengejin engamet wagik chok kengalal jin ako net kwanyik kemengejin ako ko kuya kora matebet kityo nagigibunga ako atebet ulagitip toy ng ngom ke miemoni ko katay ngalale ko kamwa Dr. Bore yesterday kole nyum kewe ka ko ken ip ke jeng ke babe ni gipa gimbo ama ko mi gimbo rit lagi ni to le ne sang gimbo ko Kung keweke nguno, agip keker ako tumwekyok, ko kikebwa awi ko saitan, ip kong kityo puch. Amu kiken ko kikibendi tumdo, ke mustoi, ip kejengei, material, nakikibendi ko nilibuo. Kikiyokta alamal, ip kong alal, kijam kebendi kabor ko, kijam ka tukuju tukul ju sikep setanik, ke ip tukul jekikipaisye. Lakini inyamiyo, ko tosta kebendi kapchirani kejeng monungot, anang kijengei nga betusiek ju nama matrianik chemitein benjosiek. Maji nama tinya kasi, jo betul je kujut kai yat, nengete menje take kwendi menje take akwendi menje take. Amu matinya baisiet. Ko kujutat kai, ko yat na yeg aweng matriat. Nyokole jine kijana yat naga tare glasi si. Kaki ku yege. Ki ko betiap tumuk. Kimi tumot ki bagbiraon, ko mi jegi bane, tukuk ki ko betiat. Ako ran ngi ngolol ji nyoru bik ci ngen kit combolat. Kombolat kit yo ne tere agoy. Ma ko ngen tukuk ci ki ke buase ke beti ako tagje. Ko ngudang kot keweke atag age ay tukuk ci ma gi ngen olgi ki bunu. Ako lagi bendi, ako amane sa ay tumtani. Ko amane tumtani bagbiraon ko terak tumtani na ga kyuna lak kyun ko gitep tano. Amane si ko betiat tol. Tukul jegi ay agaru na yek jegi mi ang nang ne ko higobetya ndaki guitosi ke lagi betya no ak ne gi ga guyeta ngalianda ni mun dakat ni parainda ak parainda nagararan taw ngalale olo gi bunu tum ta ko ngeta koy ne ngalal jin bi kyok ka guyen ni ako lagi mujige tekta metit agi mujige tekta nguna parainda ne bo olaga ka itu emoni. Building that village support. Number 3, restoring relationships. Let me close with this. There is a Harvard study. This is the longest study in the world. They have been doing this study for 85 years. It started in 1938. So in 1938, they got 724 people in the US. And they have been studying it for 85 years. Now we have less than 60 people that are alive in this study. Now, the director that is there is the 4th director of the research of project. So what is amazing about this study, they took about half of the people were from the rich families and the other half was from the projects. Out of those, I think 3 have been presidents of the United States. And those were from the lowest projects. But what is amazing is that as they have studied these people, of course, when they studied earlier, every 2 years they were doing that. But they are studying not only their health. They collect their physical health every year, psychological health, all these kinds of things. But they have also reached a point, even those who died, they have actually donated their brains for study. But they do a lot of CT scans and MRIs and all these kinds of things. They have studied their life, they have watched them talking to their wives. Now, they are following up 2,000 of their children and grandchildren. And they have been doing it from 1938 to now. What is amazing from this study, longevity has nothing. It was not the issue of exercise, diet, and all these other things did not feature anywhere. But the best thing that they have studied all these years is the relationships that they had. The relationships that they had. The question they were asking them is in the middle of the night when you're in trouble, anything, who do you call? Who is the first person that you will call? Who will be the person that will be there for you? And they looked at all the relationships they have had. Tebutienyo. Ingap kaitu, kogenyo naga. Une tiliandi ngung agoso tiangung. Une tiliandi ngung ang monungo tiangung. Sige isap to speak yo kenyi. Koki jam ko tinyi tiliandi akpikwa. Ngagi boy shek yo koki monungo. Lagi ni gingen. O lagi tep tayo akwa nyikwa. Akon gisom ki kolejinin ko ibano kaib kalip ka gipkor ko ne nyuna muy ne por waji ete be gaita lakini mutai ko mele nyo mwa ko le ja be ta ja pole ngo pa isya ju oi kaib kalip ka go boru ko gagere ko uni akon nda mi girwa ka ne girwa ju ko tepcha ngala ke be mutai nyo ko til girwa ke ko buajin lakini ko ri ba giri ba ne mai man in oso tiat ma ko mo ta ba yan ni ko le pa ko mo ajin yo aja Gitap che ko gita niya kino ko sa labayat ko sa lijam ko mi jay sa lijam ko le hop muisyo aba tumtumay aba che mangira aba kot ko imen no ka bat ko kora kalau bilang tiara kana lagi disalay ko sa lagi na boyot ya biasa ni sa ko le asay ko arget nyo asay komut ko komut orang kotot asay ko argen nyo kep ke kwan kikisalay agetip che ing goshinit akon dit nagararan. It is those relationships that helped them. Ako ko egi tuip kolilya tuai amu kinging ke tebutyen you not nagole na tep. How is our relationship? In Ruth nagagasoman chapter 1 verse 9 Kogi sanao Messiah nebalit nagama chawangun nagale. May God grant you that you may have rest in the house of your husband. Te butyan yo kingi mo to lakwan ep kopchi. Kutos kinyo ko nyuru kamunget engko ingung. At kenya ko to korote masogore ko keseni ako tienjit ko mening. Ko bwati tao lila ko kenya ko sijay ako ani. At kenya ko kwanye ko mingin. Has that dream come true or has it turned into a nightmare? King ko lakwane guy. Ko kinya giarngan ko tong ko sisay. Ko gi ko kwalilen. Amu kanya ko walak iya gution tong guy. Au gi jamat kenya ko tibiri bisi ngab laboto ni ikeni gemboy. Ang weri ngot koit. Ko tos kinyi wage kot ko amui wendi gasya gi bumasiara jajang. Tos kinyi wage weri ko sis ko kwang ningile ni geru uji nagi ko kwam bisi. That is my question. Une weri. Famenyu alengondo ywe Jehovah. Yegere tuguju tugulju. Let me close with this one. This is now the trauma issue. I showed you earlier this one here. But instead of having these ACEs, we are now having this last one. This is where now community development comes in. It's an integrated contextual approach where instead of talking about these traumatic experiences, we are looking at, it doesn't matter what our pre-existing contextual issues are, but instead of allowing it to bring detriment into our, but by intervening as a community, by intervening as a family, by intervening as a people, by God's people and servants of the Lord, the pastors and all the shepherds, work to have a supportive environment. Then we will move this towards milder and fewer reactions rather than the consequences that would have been severe. As we move up, not only do we avoid this hyperactive salience in the network, but optimum executive network. By moving the default network to the left, we are moving from this hyper-arousal when it comes to issues of trauma to actually emotional regulation instead. This is how we begin to raise our children. And therefore, we stop this generational curse, moving it more into the healthy behaviors rather than the risky. What do I do with a girl or a boy that comes and tells me, I'm no longer a girl, I want to be a boy? It depends on what is the relationship that we have had. Unet liandin giger goron, kokanget, isole ileni gongkoy garge, isole kokararan ko jeptan lineni. Iko sangen nakita TV na kay ni ngete tanong ni so ilejine mi chenga kay ka ko TV ko sirin. So day by day he begins to think about that and it's crystallized in his mind. What about the social support that you get? What about the health support that they get? Because all this will build longevity instead of morbidity. amaja wang giotak. Tachate bole. Une tiliandin nyo agorikyok. Une tiliandin nyo ak Jehovah. Une tiliandin nyo ak tisi ab kamukta indet. Chagiyok Jehovah ko tebe moni. Sugotore tech. Amungot ko maunat. Ko kala ming tunyik chetare jajang. Ako be kie moni ak tunggela ya sandugusya. Sa men yu kos kalanguni. Ingolimbaga ageng sai ni kange asis inge moni pcherongo. Aleng ko tip Jehovah tat yung kalol di sa banwek kyo kang mga tosyak kyo amunita sa menu ingay na tap Jesu.